Hello my friend, welcome back to the Sleepy Professor channel. I'm glad to see you again. Tonight we're going to take a peaceful journey through the world of mountains, those ancient silent giants that have watched over our planet for millions of years. So get comfortable, close your eyes if you'd like, and let's wander together through these magnificent landscapes. There's no rush, no hurry, just you, me, and the quiet majesty of the peaks. You know, when you think about mountains, it's easy to imagine them as permanent, unchanging features of our world. But here's something beautiful to consider. Mountains are actually very slow dancers. They grow, they shrink, they move in geological time. The Himalayas, for instance, are still growing taller each year, about 2 inches annually, rising as the Indian tectonic plate continues its ancient journey northward, pressing into the Eurasian plate. It's been doing this dance for about 50 million years now. Imagine that, while we sleep and wake, sleep and wake. Mountains are performing their patient ballet in slow motion. And speaking of the Himalayas, let me tell you about something called the Third Pole. That's what scientists sometimes call this mountain range, because it contains the largest store of ice outside the Arctic and Antarctic. Thousands of glaciers rest there, ancient rivers of ice that have been flowing, creeping, moving for millennia. These glaciers feed the great rivers of Asia, the Ganges, the Indus, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, the Yangtze. Over 1 billion people depend on the water from these mountain ice fields. It's a gentle reminder of how connected everything is, how these quiet giants care for the valleys below. Now, let's drift over to something called the tree line. You've probably noticed, if you've ever been to mountains or seen pictures of them, that trees grow up the slopes only so far and then they stop. Above a certain elevation, it's just rock and ice and alpine meadows. This boundary, this edge where the trees can no longer grow, isn't the same everywhere. In the tropics, trees can grow up to about 12,000 feet. But as you move toward the poles, this line gets lower and lower. In Scotland, trees stop at just 2,000 feet or so. The reason is fascinating in its simplicity. It's not just about temperature, though, that matters. It's about the growing season. Trees need enough warm days to photosynthesize, to grow, to prepare for winter. Above the tree line, there just aren't enough of those precious days. Let me tell you about a mountain that isn't even on land. Yes, you heard that right. Mauna Kea in Hawaii is often called the tallest mountain on Earth when measured from its base. From sea level, it's about 13,800 feet tall, which is impressive but not record-breaking. But Mauna Kea's base is on the ocean floor, and when you measure from there to summit is over 33,000 feet tall. That's taller than Mount Everest. It's a gentle reminder that mountains hide much of themselves from our view, keeping their secrets below the surface. Mountains create their own weather, did you know that? When air hits a mountain range, it has to go up and over. As it rises, it cools. Cool air can't hold as much moisture as warm air, so the water vapor condenses into clouds and rain. This is why one side of a mountain range is often lush and green, while the other side is dry, sometimes even desert. It's called the rain shadow effect. The mountains stand there, quietly dividing the world into different climates, different ecosystems, different lives, just by existing. There's a phenomenon that happens in mountains at sunrise and sunset called alpine glow. It's when the peaks turn shades of pink and orange and red, glowing as if lit from within. It happens because of the way light scatters through the atmosphere when the sun is low on the horizon. But knowing the science doesn't make it any less magical. Climbers wake up in the cold darkness just to see this moment when the mountains briefly blush before the day begins. Let's talk about something small now, something gentle. In the high mountains above the tree line, there's an entire world of tiny plants clinging to life. Alpine flowers that bloom for just a few weeks each year, making the most of the brief summer. They grow low to the ground, hugging the earth to escape the wind. Some of them can survive temperatures well below freezing. The Alpine forget-me-not, for instance, with its delicate blue flowers, grows at elevations up to 10,000 feet. These little flowers have learned patience. They might wait under snow for 9 months of the year, just for those few precious weeks of warmth and light. Mountains are some of the oldest features on Earth's surface. The Appalachian Mountains, which run along the eastern United States, are ancient. When they first formed, around 480 million years ago, they were as tall as the Himalayas are today. But time has worn them down, rounded them, softened them. Rain and wind and ice have been slowly, gently eroding them for hundreds of millions of years. What we see now are the roots of giants, the bones of mountains that once scraped the sky. Here's something that might surprise you. Mountains can sing. Well, in a way. Under certain conditions, usually involving wind and the shape of valleys and peaks, mountains can produce low-frequency sounds that we can feel more than hear. Some people call it mountain humming. In the Canadian Rockies, there are places where the wind creates eerie sounds as it moves through narrow valleys and over peaks. Indigenous peoples knew about these singing mountains long before science had explanations for them. Let's drift to the Andes now, the longest mountain range in the world. It stretches for about 4,300 miles along the western coast of South America, running through 7 countries. But here's the peaceful part. In the high Andes, there are lakes. Beautiful, still lakes sitting in old, volcanic craters or carved out by ancient glaciers. These lakes reflect the sky so perfectly that you can't tell where the water ends and the air begins. Some of these lakes are different colours: blue, green, even pink, depending on the minerals in them and the tiny organisms that live there. Imagine floating in a boat on one of these lakes, surrounded by peaks, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. The air in mountains is different, thinner. At the summit of Mount Everest, there's about 1/3 the oxygen available at sea level. Your body has to work 3 times as hard for every breath, but most mountains aren't that extreme. At moderate elevations, say 5,000 to 8,000 feet, the air is crisp and clean and just a little bit thinner, enough to make you feel awake and alive, but not so thin that you can't breathe easily. Many people sleep better at moderate elevations once they're acclimatized. There's something about the cool, clean mountain air that invites deep, restful sleep. Mountains host an enormous amount of the world's biodiversity. Even though they cover only about 25% of the Earth's land surface, they're home to about 85% of the world's species of amphibians, birds, and mammals. Why? Because as you go up a mountain, the climate changes. It's like travelling from the equator to the poles, but vertically. You can walk through several different climate zones in a single day of hiking. Each zone has its own community of plants and animals, all adapted to their specific altitude. There's a particular silence in mountains that you can't find anywhere else. In deep valleys, surrounded by peaks, sound behaves differently. Sometimes it feels muffled, absorbed by the rock and snow. Sometimes it echoes, bouncing back and forth between the cliffs. But often, in the high places, there's just silence, a profound quiet that seems to have weight and presence. It's the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, a peaceful reminder that you're alive, here, now. Snow leopards live in the mountains of Central Asia, in some of the most remote and harsh environments on Earth. They're so elusive that they're sometimes called ghost cats. These beautiful animals have adapted perfectly to their mountain home. Their wide paws act like natural snowshoes, spreading their weight so they don't sink into deep snow. Their thick tail, almost as long as their body, helps them balance on narrow ledges and wraps around them like a scarf when they sleep. They live alone mostly, wandering their vast territories in silence, appearing and disappearing like mountain mist. Let's think about valleys for a moment. Because mountains and valleys come together, they define each other. In the Swiss Alps, there are valleys that rarely see direct sunlight in winter. The sun is too low in the sky, and the mountains block it completely. These valleys have a special quality of light, soft and blue and quiet. The people who live there have learned to appreciate the reflected light, the glow of snow, the subtle shifts between dawn and dusk. They've learned to find beauty in the shadow. Mountains are sacred in many cultures around the world. Mount Kailash in Tibet is considered holy by 4 different religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and Bon. It's never been climbed, not because it's technically impossible, but because it's respected as a sacred site. The mountain stands there, untouched, a place of pilgrimage and prayer. Thousands of people walk around its base each year in a ritual called Kora, a walking meditation that takes about 3 days. The mountain witnesses their devotion, silent and eternal. There's a type of formation in mountains called a col. It's a gap or pass between 2 peaks, a low point in a ridge. These cols have been important throughout human history. They're the places where people could cross from one valley to another, from one world to another. Ancient trade routes followed these cols. Armies marched through them. Refugees fled across them. Today, many cols have roads or trails, but they still feel like threshold places, gateways between different realms. Glaciers, those slow-moving rivers of ice, have a beautiful feature called a bergschrund. It's a crevasse that forms where the glacier pulls away from the mountain face above it. In summer, these crevasses can be quite deep, revealing layers of ice that have been compressed over decades or centuries. Each layer is a year of snowfall pressed into ice, a frozen record of past winters. Looking into a bergschrund is like looking into time itself. Mountains influence wind patterns across entire continents. The Rocky Mountains, for instance, create a rain shadow that extends far to the east, helping to form the Great Plains. Without the Rockies, the interior of North America would be entirely different. The mountains stand there, dividing weather systems, directing the flow of air, shaping the land hundreds of miles away. They're the quiet architects of climate. Let's talk about something called Krummholz. It's a German word that means crooked wood. Near the tree line, where conditions are too harsh for normal trees, you sometimes find these twisted, stunted trees that grow horizontally instead of vertically, shaped by constant wind and cold. They look almost like bonsai trees, but they're full-size trees that have adapted to survive in an impossibly harsh environment. Some of these Krummholz trees are hundreds of years old, having grown just inches in a decade. They're a testament to persistence, to the quiet determination of life. In the mountains of New Zealand, there's a bird called the kea. It's the world's only alpine parrot, and it's known for its intelligence and curiosity. Keys live above the tree line, in some of the most rugged terrain imaginable. They're playful birds, often seen sliding down snowbanks just for fun, or playing with objects they find, investigating everything with their curved beaks. Even in the harsh environment of the mountains, there's room for play, for joy, for curiosity. Mountains create something called thermal inversions. Usually air gets colder as you go up in elevation, but sometimes, especially on clear, calm nights, cold air sinks into the valleys while warmer air stays higher up on the slopes. This creates a layer of warm air above cold air, an inversion of the normal pattern. When this happens, you can stand on a mountain slope and look down at a sea of clouds filling the valley below, with peaks rising like islands from the mist. It's like standing on the shore of a cloud ocean. The Matterhorn, that iconic pyramid-shaped peak in the Swiss Alps, wasn't successfully climbed until 1865. It wasn't the highest peak, but its shape made it one of the most challenging. The first successful ascent was bittersweet. On the way down, 4 of the 7 climbers fell to their deaths. The mountain, indifferent to human ambition, claimed them. Today, climbers still attempt the Matterhorn, drawn by its perfect shape, its aesthetic beauty. The mountain stands unchanged, watching climbers come and go like clouds. There are mountains under the ocean too, entire ranges of them, spreading across the ocean floor like terrestrial mountains spread across continents. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean, where 2 tectonic plates are slowly pulling apart. As they separate, magma rises from deep in the earth and creates new oceanic crust, building mountains that we rarely see. These underwater mountains are just as majestic as the ones we know, hidden beneath miles of water. In mountain ecosystems, there's something called a keystone species. These are species that have a disproportionately large effect on their environment. In some North American mountain ranges, beavers are a keystone species. They build dams that create ponds and wetlands, which in turn support dozens of other species. The mountains provide the valleys and streams, the beavers engineer the water flow, and an entire ecosystem flourishes. Everything connected, everything dependent on everything else. Let's think about the color of mountains. From a distance, they often appear blue or purple, especially at sunset. This is because of atmospheric scattering. The farther away something is, the more atmosphere you're looking through to see it, and the more the light scatters. Blue light scatters more than other colors, so distant mountains take on that dreamy blue-violet hue. It's the same effect that makes the sky blue, but applied to the land. Mountains fade into the distance like a watercolor painting. There's a word in Japanese, komorebi, which describes sunlight filtering through trees. While it's not specifically a mountain word, there's a particular quality to mountain forest where komorebi happens. The light comes at different angles because of the slope. It plays through the trees differently. Early morning or late afternoon, when the sun is low, the mountain forest becomes a cathedral of light and shadow, beams of sunlight cutting through the dim green shade. The Rocky Mountains are home to an animal called the pika, a small mammal that looks like a cross between a rabbit and a hamster. Pikas are incredibly sensitive to temperature. They can die if exposed to temperatures above 70 centigrade for too long, so they live in the rocks at high elevations where it stays cool. You can often hear them before you see them, giving the distinctive "ee" alarm call. In late summer, they gather plants and spread them on rocks to dry, making hay for the winter. They're tiny farmers in the high country, working diligently as winter approaches. Mountains have a way of making time feel different. When you're in the mountains, surrounded by formations that are millions of years old, your own life seems very small and very short. But it's not a depressing feeling, it's actually quite peaceful. Your worries and concerns, which seemed so important, shrink to their proper size. The mountain has been here long before you arrived, and it will be here long after you leave. There's something comforting in that permanence. The Andes are home to the spectacled bear, South America's only bear species. These gentle animals live in cloud forests and high mountain grasslands, eating mostly plants, though they're technically carnivores. They're called spectacled bears because of the distinctive markings around their eyes that look like glasses. Each bear's markings are unique, like fingerprints. They're solitary animals, wandering the mountains alone, occasionally climbing trees to feast on fruit, living quietly in some of the most beautiful landscapes on Earth. When snow falls on mountains, it doesn't fall evenly. The wind redistributes it, blowing it off the windward slopes and depositing it on the lee slopes. This creates cornices, which are overhanging edges of snow that look solid but are actually quite fragile. In moonlight, these cornices can look like frozen waves. The mountain becomes a sculpture garden of snow, each peak wearing its crown of white differently. There are lichens growing on mountain rocks that are thousands of years old. Lichens grow incredibly slowly in harsh conditions, sometimes just a millimeter or two per year. Some of the lichens in the Arctic and Antarctic are estimated to be over 5,000 years old, making them among the oldest living things on Earth. They're not even a single organism, but a symbiosis between a fungus and an algae or cyanobacteria, living together, protecting each other, slowly colonizing bare rock. In the mountains, water is constantly moving through the rock. Snowmelt and rain seep into cracks and fissures, moving through the mountain like blood through a body. This water emerges as springs, often crystal clear and cold, filtered through layers of rock. Mountain springs have been sacred sites in many cultures, places where the earth gives forth pure water as a gift. People have built shrines around them, knowing that this water is life itself, offered freely by the mountain. The way mountains erode is a kind of slow sculpture. Water gets into cracks in the rock and freezes. Ice expands, widening the cracks slightly. The ice melts. Water seeps deeper, freezes again. Over thousands of years, this freeze-thaw cycle breaks the rock apart piece by piece. The mountain slowly carves itself, creating the shapes we find so beautiful. The sharp ridges, the deep valleys, the towering cliffs. The mountain is both the sculptor and the sculpture. There's a type of cloud that forms in mountains called a lenticular cloud. These are lens-shaped clouds that form when moist air flows over a mountain and creates a standing wave in the atmosphere. The cloud forms at the crest of the wave and can stay in the same spot for hours, even though the wind is constantly blowing through it. New water droplets condense on the upwind side while old droplets evaporate on the downwind side. The cloud appears stationary, hovering over the peak like a UFO. It's a perfect example of how mountains create order in the chaos of weather. In the Alps, there's a wind called the föhn. It's a warm, dry wind that descends from the mountains into the valleys. As air rises over the mountains, it cools and loses its moisture as rain or snow. Then, as it descends on the other side, it warms up, but now it's dry. This föhn wind can raise temperatures dramatically in just a few hours, sometimes melting snow overnight. People in alpine valleys can tell when the föhn is coming. The mountains seem to breathe warm air down into the lowlands. Mount Fuji is almost perfectly symmetrical, a beautiful cone that has become a symbol of Japan. It's a dormant volcano, but not extinct. It last erupted in 1707, covering the city of Edo, now Tokyo, with ash. Despite, or perhaps because of its potential danger, Fuji is sacred in Japanese culture. Climbing it is a pilgrimage. There's a saying, "A wise person climbs Fuji once, a fool climbs it twice." The mountain offers its beauty to those who approach it with respect, asking nothing but that they remember they are guests. In mountain caves, there are formations called flowstones, created when mineral-rich water flows over rock and leaves deposits behind. Over thousands of years, these deposits build up into smooth, flowing shapes that look like frozen waterfalls. The caves in mountains are entire hidden worlds, dark and silent, where water writes its slow poetry on stone. The ibex is a wild goat that lives in the mountains of Europe, Asia and Africa. They're incredible climbers, able to stand on tiny ledges, to leap across gaps that make a human dizzy to look at. Their hooves have a hard outer edge and a soft inner pad, giving them both grip and stability on rock. Male ibex have long curved horns that can grow over 3 feet long. They live above the tree line in a world of rock and ice, moving with grace and confidence through terrain that would be impassable to most animals. Mountains teach patience. Every alpinist knows this. You can't rush a mountain. You move at the pace the mountain allows, one step at a time. When the weather turns bad, you wait. When you're tired, you rest. The summit will either be there when you arrive, or it won't. The mountain doesn't care about your schedule, your ambitions, your pride. It simply is. And somehow, this indifference is not cruel but liberating. There are lakes in the mountains so clear you can see down 100 feet or more. Crater Lake in Oregon, formed in the collapsed caldera of an ancient volcano, is one of the clearest lakes in the world. The water is so pure, so unaffected by runoff or sediment, that it glows an intense blue. Looking at it is like looking into the sky. The lake sits in its mountain bowl, reflecting the sky, blurring the boundary between earth and air. The sound of wind in mountains is different at different elevations. In the valleys, wind in trees sounds like rushing water, a continuous whisper. Higher up, where there are only rocks and low plants, the wind sounds clearer, sharper, sometimes singing as it flows around boulders. At the very highest elevations, on exposed ridges, the wind can roar like an ocean. Mountains are wind instruments, each one playing its own unique melody. In the Himalayas, there's a flower called the Himalayan blue poppy. It grows at elevations up to 15,000 feet, in rocky meadows and on scree slopes. The flowers are a stunning sky blue, a colour so vivid it almost doesn't look real. Each flower blooms for just a short time, but when a whole meadow of them blooms together, it's like someone has scattered pieces of sky across the mountainside. These poppies contain alkaloids that protect them from the intense UV radiation at high elevations, a chemical sunscreen produced by the plant itself. Mountain streams are different from rivers in the lowlands. They're faster, colder, more turbulent. The constant tumbling over rocks oxygenates the water, making it good habitat for trout and other fish that need cold, oxygen-rich water. The sound of a mountain stream is one of the most universally calming sounds in nature. Something about the randomness of it, the variation within the constancy, speaks to something deep in the human brain, telling us we're near fresh water, we're safe, we can rest. In some mountain ranges there are natural bridges, arches of rock spanning valleys or gorges. These form through erosion, water wearing away softer rock until only a span remains. These bridges are temporary on geological timescales. They'll eventually collapse, but right now, in our time, they stand. Natural temples, gates to nowhere and everywhere. The Alps are home to the alpine salamander, one of the few salamander species that doesn't lay eggs in water. Instead, the females give birth to live young. This adaptation allows them to live at high elevations, far from ponds or streams. The young develop inside the mother for up to 4 years in some cases, one of the longest gestation periods of any amphibian. When they're born, they're fully formed, ready for life in the mountains. Life finds a way, even in the harshest places. Mountain valleys often develop their own microclimates. A south-facing valley might be warm and dry, while a north-facing valley just over the ridge is cool and moist. These differences can be dramatic enough to support completely different communities of plants and animals. The mountains create a mosaic of different worlds, all adjacent to each other, all connected but distinct. There's a particular quality of solitude in mountains. You can be completely alone in a way that's difficult to achieve in the lowlands. Surrounded by peaks, miles from any road, you become aware of your own smallness, your own vulnerability, but also your own strength. The fact that you're there, that you can be there, that you can experience this is itself remarkable. The mountain offers no comfort but also no judgment. It simply allows you to be. In the mountains of Ethiopia, there's an animal called the gelada. They're sometimes called bleeding heart monkeys because of the distinctive red patch of skin on their chests. Geladas live at elevations up to 14,000 feet, in large troops that can number in the hundreds. They're the only primates that are primarily grass eaters, grazing on the mountain meadows like cattle. They're highly social, communicating with a complex system of calls and facial expressions. Even at the top of the world, there's room for community, for connection. When glaciers melt, they sometimes reveal things that have been frozen for decades or centuries. In the Alps, glaciers have given up the bodies of climbers from expeditions long past, their clothes and equipment perfectly preserved. They've revealed ancient artifacts showing that people have been crossing mountain passes for thousands of years. The glaciers are archives, libraries of ice, slowly releasing their secrets as the world warms. Mountain ecosystems are particularly vulnerable to climate change because the species living there have nowhere higher to go. As temperatures warm, species adapted to cold conditions move up the slopes, following the climate they're adapted to. But eventually, they run out of mountain. This makes mountains important indicators of climate change, early warning systems showing us what's happening to the planet. Let's talk about the smell of mountains. There's a particular scent to high elevation forests. Pine resin, decomposing needles, cool damp earth, the sharp, clean smell of snow. At very high elevations above the tree line, the air doesn't smell like much at all. It's just clean, almost sterile, with perhaps a hint of rock dust. That clean smell is the absence of all the biological activity that gives lowland air its complex scent. It's the smell of simplicity, of a world reduced to its essential elements. In the mountains of Papua New Guinea, there are birds of paradise that perform elaborate courtship dances. The males clear small stages on the forest floor and perform for females, displaying their incredible plumage. These forests are on mountains, isolated by valleys and lowlands, and this isolation has allowed each mountain range to develop its own species of birds of paradise. The mountains have created evolutionary laboratories, places where life experiments with beauty. There's a star called Polaris, the North Star, that mountain travelers have used for navigation for thousands of years. Because Earth's axis points toward it, it appears stationary in the sky while other stars wheel around it. From mountain camps far from city lights, the stars are so bright they cast shadows. You can see the Milky Way, that river of stars flowing across the sky. The mountain becomes a platform from which to view the universe. Mountain shadows are longest at sunrise and sunset. the peaks cast shadows that can stretch for miles across valleys and lowlands. These shadows move as the sun moves, sweeping across the land like the hand of a sundial. In the valleys, people can tell the time of day by which peaks are in shadow and which are in light. The mountains become timepieces, marking the passage of the day with light and dark. There are mountain ranges on other planets and moons in our solar system. Olympus Mons on Mars is the tallest known mountain in the solar system, about 72,000 feet high, nearly 3 times the height of Mount Everest. Saturn's moon, Iapetus, has a ridge running along its equator that's over 12 miles high in places. Mountains are not just an Earth phenomenon. Wherever there are solid surfaces and geological processes, there are mountains reaching toward the sky. In mountain forests, there are often nurse logs, fallen trees that serve as seedbeds for new growth. The decomposing log provides nutrients and a raised platform that keeps seedlings away from the deep snow. You can see lines of trees, all growing from the same old log, which has now completely rotted away. The forest has memory, new life growing from old, death-feeding life in an endless cycle. The treacherous beauty of mountains has inspired poets as artists for centuries. The Romantic painters loved mountains, seeing in them a sublime terror, a beauty mixed with danger. Today, we see them perhaps more gently, but the inspiration remains. There's something about the combination of beauty and indifference, majesty and peril that speaks to the human soul. Mountain goats, native to North America, aren't actually goats, but are more closely related to antelopes. They're stocky animals with thick white coats and black horns. Their hooves have sharp outer edges and a soft inner pad that can grip smooth rock. They can climb nearly vertical cliffs, spending their days grazing on the sparse vegetation of rocky ledges. When you see them balanced on impossibly steep rock faces, it's a reminder that what seems impossible to us is home to them. In the highest mountains, the sky is a deeper blue than at sea level. This is because there's less atmosphere above you to scatter the light. On the summit of Mount Everest, the sky is so dark it's almost purple, shading toward the black of space. Climbers sometimes describe it as being able to see the edge of space, the place where the atmosphere gives way to void. Mountains collect water and release it slowly. The snowpack acts like a reservoir, storing winter precipitation and releasing it as meltwater through the spring and summer. This timing is crucial for ecosystems and human agriculture in many regions. The mountains regulate the water supply, providing a steady flow when it's needed most. They're natural water towers, serving the lands below. There's a type of mountain formation called a horn, which is a peak that's been carved by glaciers from multiple sides. The Matterhorn is a classic example. As glaciers flow down different valleys, they erode the mountain from multiple directions, eventually creating a sharp, pyramid-shaped peak. These horns are some of the most dramatic mountain features, products of ice and time working in concert. In Bhutan, many peaks remain unclimbed, not because they're technically impossible, but because they're considered sacred. The highest unclimbed mountain in the world is Gangkhar Puensum, at 24,040 feet, on the border between Bhutan and China. Bhutan has banned mountaineering on peaks above 20,000 feet, out of respect for local spiritual beliefs. These mountains stand inviolate, their summits untouched by human feet, holy and protected. The sound of rocks falling in mountains is strangely beautiful in a dangerous way. A rockfall starts with a crack, then a rumble, then the cascading sound of rock hitting rock, bouncing, breaking until it finally comes to rest far below. It's a reminder that mountains are not static. They're constantly changing, constantly falling apart in slow motion, returning to the earth piece by piece. In mountain meadows, marmots whistle to communicate. These large ground squirrels live in burrows and come out to graze during the day. When one spots a predator, it gives a sharp whistle, and all the marmots dive for their burrows. Their whistles echo off the rocks, carried by the mountain air. In the silence of the high country, these whistles are almost musical, adding life to the stillness. The snow on mountains is not all the same. There's powder snow, light and fluffy. Corn snow, which has melted and refrozen into granular crystals. Wind-packed snow, hard as concrete. Each type of snow behaves differently, looks different, sounds different when you walk on it. The mountain wears many coats, each with its own texture and character. Mountain passes have names that tell stories. Donner Pass, where emigrants face terrible hardship. Brenner Pass, which has been a trade route since Roman times. Khyber Pass, through which armies have marched for millennia. Each pass is a corridor of history, a place where geography forced human events into narrow channels. The mountains shaped our history by determining where we could and couldn't go. There are insects that live in mountains, even at very high elevations. The Himalayan jumping spider holds the record for the highest elevation where an animal has been found, spotted at 22,000 feet on Mount Everest. It survives by eating other insects and springtails blown up the mountain by the wind. Life persists in the strangest places, clinging to existence even at the edge of possibility. The angle of the sun in mountains creates distinctive patterns of light. Morning light hits the peaks first, gradually descending into the valleys. Evening light lingers on the peaks after the valleys are in shadow. There's a brief period just after sunset when the peaks glow with the last light of day while everything else is blue with dusk. This is called the golden hour, and in mountains, it's pure magic. In the mountains of Kenya near the equator, there's snow. Mount Kenya and Mount Kilimanjaro both have glaciers, even though they're just a few degrees from the equator. This seems contradictory until you remember that temperature drops with altitude. The mountains are tall enough to reach into the cold layers of the atmosphere, tall enough to hold snow year-round. Tiny pieces of the poles existing at the equator. Mountain rivers, when they leave the mountains and enter the plains, often form alluvial fans, spreading deltas of sediment that the river has carried from above. These fans are incredibly fertile, enriched by minerals eroded from the mountains. Many civilizations have flourished on these alluvial fans, their agriculture supported by soil the mountains donated grain by grain, year after year. The breathing of the earth creates mountains. Tectonic plates drift on the molten rock beneath them, colliding, grinding against each other, one sliding under the other or crumpling together. These movements happen slowly, but with unimaginable force. The Himalayas are still rising because India is still pushing into Asia. The earth breathes in geological time, and mountains are the ripples on its surface. In mountain caves, the temperature stays constant year-round, usually close to the average annual temperature of the region. In winter, the caves are warmer than the outside. In summer, they're cooler. Animals know this. Bears den in mountain caves, sleeping through winter in relative warmth. Bats roost there. Humans too have used mountain caves for shelter since time immemorial. The profile of a mountain range against the sky, especially at sunset, is like a signature. Each range has its own distinctive skyline, and people who live near mountains come to know that skyline intimately. It becomes part of their sense of home, part of their identity. The mountains become a reference point, both literal and metaphorical, something solid and permanent in a changing world. Let's think about avalanches for a moment, not the danger of them, but the strange beauty. An avalanche is essentially a fluid flow of snow, behaving like a liquid even though it's solid. When conditions are right, a slab of snow breaks free and flows down the mountain, creating a cloud of snow crystals that catch the light like diamonds. From a safe distance, there's something mesmerizing about the power and grace of it. Moss grows on rocks in mountain streams, creating underwater gardens. These mosses are incredibly resilient, able to withstand the constant flow of cold water, occasional floods, and winter ice. They provide habitat for tiny invertebrates, which in turn feed the fish. Even the smallest, most overlooked things in mountains play their part in the web of life. There's a particular silence that falls after a snowstorm in the mountains. Fresh snow absorbs sound, muffling everything. The world becomes quieter, softer. Walking through the forest after a snowfall, you can hear your own heartbeat. The trees stand with their branches weighted down with snow, perfectly still, waiting for the sun. Mountain lakes freeze from the top down, which seems obvious until you think about it. Most liquids become denser as they get colder and would freeze from the bottom up. But water is weird. It's densest at 39 degrees and gets less dense as it gets colder, which is why ice floats. This property means that lakes freeze at the surface, creating an insulating layer that protects the life below. Fish can survive under the ice all winter. The mountain gives and the mountain preserves. In Japan there's a saying, "He who climbs Mount Fuji is a wise man. He who climbs twice is a fool." The journey up is arduous, but the view from the top makes it worthwhile. The descent, however, is hard on the knees and takes nearly as long as the ascent. The saying reminds us that some experiences are meant to be treasured for their uniqueness, not repeated endlessly. Eagles nest in mountains, building their eyries on inaccessible cliff faces. From these high perches they survey vast territories, their keen eyes capable of spotting a rabbit from miles away. They ride the thermals and updrafts that mountains create, soaring with barely a wing beat, masters of the mountain air. Watching an eagle soar against the backdrop of peaks is to witness perfect adaptation, perfect grace. There are mountain ranges that are almost entirely below sea level. The mid-ocean ridges spreading zones where tectonic plates are pulling apart are technically mountains. They form the longest mountain chain on Earth, over 40,000 miles long, but we can't see most of it because it's underwater. It reminds us that our perspective is limited, that there's always more than we can see. The way sound travels in mountains depends on temperature, gradients. Usually sound bends upward and away because air near the ground is warmer. But in mountains, inversions can occur where warmer air is above colder air. When this happens, sound can travel for miles, bending down and reflecting off the inversion layer. You might hear a conversation from miles away, carried clearly through the mountain air, as if the speakers were just around the corner. Edelweiss is a small white flower that grows in the Alps at elevations up to 10,000 feet. It's covered in woolly hairs that protect it from cold and UV radiation. In the past, young men would climb dangerous slopes to pick Edelweiss for their sweethearts as proof of their courage and devotion. Now the flower is protected in many areas, but it remains a symbol of mountain beauty, of things precious because they're rare and difficult to reach. Mountain rivers carry stories written in stone. The rounded pebbles in a riverbed have been tumbled smooth over thousands of years. The angular rocks are fresh, newly broken from the cliff face. The sand was once solid rock, ground down grain by grain. Each particle in a mountain stream has its own history, and all of them together are writing the future geography of the lowlands. In the mountains of Colorado, aspens grow in large clonal colonies. What looks like a forest of individual trees is actually a single organism connected by underground roots. One colony, called Pando in Utah, is estimated to weigh over 6,000 tons and be 80,000 years old, making it one of the oldest and heaviest living organisms on Earth. These aspens turn brilliant gold in autumn, entire mountainsides changing colour in unison because they're all one being, responding together to the change of seasons. The moon looks bigger when it rises over mountains. This is an optical illusion called the moon illusion. The moon is actually the same size whether it's on the horizon or overhead, but when we see it near objects like mountains, our brain interprets it as being larger. The mountains frame the moon, give it context, make it part of a landscape rather than just a light in the void. In mountain caves, there are formations called cave pearls. They form when water dripping from the ceiling creates a concretion around a grain of sand or small rock, building it up layer by layer like a pearl in an oyster. These cave pearls can be nearly perfect spheres, polished by water over centuries. The mountain creates jewelry in its hidden depths, patient and unseen. There's a concept in mountaineering called summit fever. When the desire to reach the top overrides good judgment, climbers with summit fever will continue upward even when conditions become dangerous, even when they should turn back. Mountains teach us about ambition and its limits, about when to push forward and when to accept that some goals are beyond reach, at least for today. The boreal forests that cover many mountain slopes in the northern hemisphere are vast storehouses of carbon. The trees, the soil, the accumulated organic matter, all of it is carbon that's been pulled from the atmosphere and stored. These mountain forests are one of the planet's lungs, breathing in carbon dioxide and breathing out oxygen, quietly regulating the atmosphere. Moonlight on snow-covered mountains creates a landscape of silver and shadow. The snow reflects the moonlight so effectively that you can read by it, hike by it, see almost as well as by day but in grayscale. Shadows are sharper, contrast stronger. The world becomes a study in light and dark, simple and beautiful. There are hot springs in mountains heated by the Earth's internal heat. These springs can be near the summit of volcanic peaks, creating the surreal experience of sitting in hot water surrounded by snow. The minerals dissolved in the hot water often create colourful deposits around the springs: yellow, orange, red, green. The mountain offers both ice and fire, extremes existing side by side. The way trees grow in mountains tells a story. On the windward side of a peak, trees might be stunted and bent by constant wind. On the lee side, protected from the worst of the weather, they grow tall and straight. The trees are living records of the wind's patterns, shaped by decades of invisible force. Mountain huts, built in remote locations for climbers and hikers, are places of refuge and community. When you arrive at a mountain hut after a long day of hiking, cold and tired, the warmth and shelter feel miraculous. Strangers share food and stories, bound together by their shared experience of the mountain. These huts are islands of human warmth in the wilderness. Permafrost in mountains is thawing due to climate change, and as it thaws, it can destabilize slopes that have been solid for thousands of years. Rockfalls and landslides are becoming more common in some mountain ranges. The mountains are changing faster now than they have in a long time. They're sensitive indicators of what's happening to our climate, early warnings written in stone and ice. There's a type of rainbow that appears in mountain mist and spray, a fog bow. It's similar to a rainbow but appears in fog instead of rain, and instead of colours it's usually white or very pale colours. These ghostly arcs appear in the mist, ephemeral and delicate, a reminder that beauty comes in many forms, not all of them bright and bold. In the Andes there are structures called tambos, way stations built along ancient roads to provide shelter for travellers. Some of these tambos are still standing, silent witnesses to centuries of travellers crossing the mountains. They speak to the human need to journey, to explore, to cross barriers, and to the equally human need to provide shelter and aid to fellow travellers. The ice in glaciers contains bubbles of ancient air, trapped when the snow fell and was compressed into ice. Scientists can extract these bubbles and analyse the air inside, learning about the atmosphere of the past. The glaciers are libraries preserving information about climate history, written in ice and air and waiting to be read. When clouds flow over a mountain pass, they can look like a waterfall of cloud, spilling down the mountainside. This happens when the wind pushes moist air over the ridge, and the air cools and condenses on the leeward side. The clouds form at the top of the ridge and dissipate at the bottom, creating the illusion of flowing water. The mountain makes the invisible visible, showing us the movement of air as clearly as we see the movement of water. Mountain meadows in summer are often filled with wildflowers, creating tapestries of colour. Each species blooms at its own time, creating a succession of colours through the season. These meadows are brief, intense celebrations of life, making the most of the short growing season. Then autumn comes, the flowers set seed, and the meadow prepares for another long winter under the snow. The highest permanent human settlement on Earth is La Rinconada, Peru, at over 16,700 feet elevation. About 50,000 people live there, mostly miners. The air is thin, the weather harsh, but people have adapted. Children born at this elevation develop larger lungs and hearts. The human body is remarkably adaptable, able to thrive even in conditions that seem barely habitable. Sometimes, in the right conditions, a mountain can cast a perfect triangular shadow on the sky opposite the sun. This is most easily seen at sunrise or sunset when the sun is low. The mountain's shadow projects onto the atmosphere, creating a gigantic dark triangle pointing away from the sun. It's a moment of perfect geometry, the mountain drawing its own portrait in the sky. Pine trees in mountains sometimes grow pine cones that remain closed for years, waiting for fire. The heat from a forest fire causes the cones to open and release their seeds, which then germinate in the nutrient-rich ash. Life uses even destruction as an opportunity, turning endings into beginnings. The stars wheel around mountains through the night. If you set up a camera and take a long exposure, the stars trace circles in the sky while the mountain remains still, a fixed point in a turning universe. The image becomes a meditation on motion and stillness, time and timelessness. Lichens come in colours you wouldn't expect: bright orange, chartreuse green, and pale blue. They paint the rocks in abstract patterns, growing so slowly that a patch of lichen might be older than any tree in the forest below. They ask nothing from the rock but a surface to cling to, and they give back nothing but their slow beauty. When you stand on a summit, you can see the curvature of the earth if the mountain is tall enough and the day is clear enough. The horizon becomes subtly curved, a reminder that you're standing on a sphere, that the world is round, that what seems flat from the ground is actually curved into space. Mountain caves sometimes contain ice that never melts, even in summer. These ice caves are natural freezers, preserving anything that falls into them. Occasionally, they preserve animals that fell in centuries ago, frozen in time, waiting in the dark until someone finds them. There are mountains on Earth that are still growing, and mountains that are still eroding, and mountains that are doing both at the same time. The Himalayas grow about 2 inches per year but erode almost as fast. The mountains are in a kind of equilibrium, building and destroying simultaneously a dynamic balance. The last light on a mountain, just before it fades to blue and then to darkness, has a particular quality. It's warm and soft and seems to come from within the rock itself, as if the mountain has absorbed light all day and is now slowly releasing it. Then it fades, and the stars come out, and the mountain becomes a silhouette against the sky. There's a particular moment just before dawn in the mountains when the world is suspended between night and day. The stars are still visible, but the eastern sky begins to pale. Birds haven't started singing yet. The world holds its breath. It's the quietest time, the stillest time, when the mountain feels most like a living presence, aware and watching. Mountain goats have amazing eyes with rectangular pupils, like many hoofed animals. This shape of pupil gives them a wide field of vision, nearly 340 degrees, allowing them to see predators approaching from almost any angle, while they're focused on climbing. Their entire body is designed for the vertical world they inhabit, every feature an adaptation to life on the edge. In some mountain ranges, there are natural amphitheatres carved by erosion, places where sound reflects and amplifies. Indigenous peoples knew about these places and used them for ceremonies and gatherings. A whisper in the right spot could be heard across the entire space. The mountains created these acoustic wonders long before humans discovered them natural, concert halls waiting in the wilderness. The roots of mountain plants are often far more extensive than the parts we see above ground. A small alpine flower might have roots that extend 3 feet down into rock crevices, searching for water and nutrients. What looks fragile above the surface is anchored by an invisible network below. It's a good metaphor for resilience. What sustains us is often hidden from view. In the Caucasus Mountains between Europe and Asia, there are ancient towers built centuries ago by local communities. These stone towers served as homes, fortresses and watchtowers. Some are still standing, weathered but unbroken, testament to the skill of their builders and the durability of stone. The mountains preserve these human stories, holding them gently in their valleys. Chinook winds, similar to the foehn winds of the Alps, occur in the Rocky Mountains. These warm winds can raise temperatures by 40 degrees Fahrenheit in just a few hours, turning a winter day into something resembling spring. The name comes from the Chinook people of the Pacific Northwest. These winds are so dramatic that they seem almost magical, the mountain's breath warming the frozen land. There are mountain ranges on other continents that we rarely think about. The Urals, running north to south through Russia, are often considered the boundary between Europe and Asia. They're old mountains, worn down by time, but still significant enough to divide a continent. Mountains define boundaries, both geographical and cultural, channeling human history along their slopes. Mountain lakes can stratify into layers based on temperature. The warm water stays near the surface, the cold water sinks. These layers don't mix much during summer. In fall, as the surface water cools, the lake turns over, mixing the layers and redistributing oxygen and nutrients. This turnover is crucial for lake ecology, a seasonal reset that keeps the system healthy. There's something called a widowmaker in mountain forests. dead branches hung up in tree canopy, waiting to fall. They're dangerous, yes, but they're also part of the forest cycle. When they fall, they create gaps in the canopy, letting light reach the forest floor, giving new seedlings a chance to grow. Even dead wood plays its role in the mountain's ecology. The Alps were once as tall as the Himalayas are now. They formed when the African tectonic plate collided with the European plate, crumpling the crust between them. That was about 65 million years ago. Since then, erosion has worn them down, but they're still rising slightly due to the ongoing collision. The mountain story is one of competing forces, uplift and erosion, building and breaking down, eternally balanced. In mountain folklore around the world, peaks are often seen as the homes of gods and spirits. Mount Olympus in Greece was home to the Greek gods. Mount Kailash in Tibet is sacred to multiple religions. Many indigenous cultures have sacred peaks that cannot be climbed. This reverence makes sense. Mountains touch the sky, dwelling in both earth and air, threshold places between the mortal and the eternal. There's a type of cloud called a banner cloud that streams from the peak of a mountain like a flag. It forms when wind blowing over the peak creates a low-pressure zone on the lee side, causing moisture to condense. These clouds can extend for miles, marking the peak even when the mountain itself is obscured. The Matterhorn often has a banner cloud, giving it an even more dramatic appearance. Mountain streams create a kind of music, not metaphorically, but actually. The turbulence as water flows over rocks creates sounds across a range of frequencies. Fast sections sound higher pitched, slower pools sound deeper. The stream is composing a symphony that changes with the seasons, louder during spring snowmelt, quieter in late summer, then falling silent under winter ice. Each stream has its own voice, its own song. In the mountains of New Guinea, there are birds of paradise that have never been seen by most people. The mountain ranges are so rugged, so remote, that new species are still being discovered. Some valleys have been isolated for so long that they've developed their own unique species. The mountains are creators of diversity, their barriers allowing life to experiment with new forms. Sunset in mountains can create something called the Belt of Venus, a pink band in the sky opposite the sunset, above the blue shadow of the Earth. This pink glow is sunlight scattered through the atmosphere, and it's most visible when you have mountains to provide a clear horizon. It's named after the Roman goddess of love, and it's easy to see why. It's a tender, beautiful phenomenon that lasts only a few minutes. Mountain meadows in the Arctic and subarctic regions burst into bloom during the brief summer. Flowers that have been waiting under snow for 9 months bloom all at once, creating an intense display of colour. Bees and other pollinators work frantically, knowing the season is short. It's life compressed, intensified, making every moment count. There are mountain caves so deep they have their own weather systems. As outside air temperature changes, air flows into or out of the cave, creating winds. Some caves have clouds forming inside them. These cave systems are like lungs, breathing with the atmosphere, creating microclimates in their depths. The oldest evidence of humans in high mountains comes from the Ethiopian highlands, where people have lived at elevations above 10,000 feet for thousands of years. They've adapted to the altitude, developing larger lung capacity and more efficient oxygen utilization. The mountains have shaped human evolution, selecting for traits that allow survival in thin air. In winter, rime ice forms on mountain peaks when supercooled water droplets in fog freeze on contact with any surface. This creates fantastic formations, feathers and spikes, and irregular shapes of ice that can grow several feet long. Trees become ice sculptures, rocks wear crystal crowns. The mountain becomes an ice garden, beautiful and alien. Mountain shadows at sunrise and sunset can create something called a spectre, your own shadow projected onto clouds or mist below you, often surrounded by a circular rainbow called a glory. The effect is named after the Brocken spectre, observed on the Brocken Peak in Germany. It's eerie and beautiful, seeing your shadow cast upon the clouds, gigantic and ghostly. There are mountain ranges that exist because of glaciers. The Finger Lakes region of New York was carved by glaciers during the Ice Ages. As the glaciers advanced and retreated, they gouged deep valleys that later filled with water. The landscape of rolling hills and long narrow lakes is a legacy of ice, the mountain's children shaped by frozen water. In the Himalayan region, there are Buddhist monasteries perched on mountainsides, some at elevations above 12,000 feet. Monks have lived in these remote locations for centuries, seeking isolation and spiritual clarity. The thin air, the vast views, the silence. All of these are conducive to meditation, to turning inward, to seeking enlightenment. The mountains provide a natural sanctuary. Mountain lakes sometimes freeze in patterns, the ice forming geometric shapes as it expands. Cracks radiate from the shore, creating patterns like spider webs or shattered glass. These patterns are purely functional, the result of physical forces, but they're also beautiful, nature creating abstract art in ice. There's a type of mountain called a shield volcano, which forms gradually from repeated lava flows. These mountains have gentle slopes rather than steep sides. Mauna Loa in Hawaii is a shield volcano, built from countless eruptions over hundreds of thousands of years. The mountain grows slowly, peacefully, layer upon layer, a different kind of mountain building than the violent collision of tectonic plates. The air pressure at high elevations affects how water boils. At the top of Mount Everest, water boils at about 160 dideri instead of 212. This makes cooking difficult and means you can't make a proper cup of tea, which bothered British climbers of the early 20th century tremendously. It's a small detail, but it shows how mountains create a different physical environment where the rules change. In autumn, mountains in temperate zones become tapestries of colour as deciduous trees change. The reds and oranges and yellows spread up the slopes in waves as cooler temperatures trigger the colour change. Each species changes at its own time, creating complex patterns across the mountainside. It's the mountain's last celebration before winter's sleep. Mountain peoples around the world have developed unique cultures adapted to their environment. The Sherpa people of Nepal, the Quechua of the Andes, the various groups in the Caucasus. Each has its own traditions, its own ways of living with the mountains. These cultures embody wisdom accumulated over generations, knowledge of how to thrive in challenging environments. There are mountain peaks that have never been climbed, not because they're impossibly high or technically difficult, but because they're too remote, too far from anywhere, not famous enough to draw climbers. These peaks stand anonymous, unnamed, experienced only by the clouds and the wind and perhaps a soaring eagle. They're a reminder that not everything needs to be conquered or named to have value. The timberline, that boundary where trees stop growing, isn't sharp but gradual. Trees become shorter and more twisted as you approach it, until finally you're left with Krummholz, and then just grass and rock. This gradient is the mountain showing you gently the increasing harshness of conditions, the difficulty of survival as you climb higher. Mountain rescue teams around the world are made up largely of volunteers, people who love the mountains, enough to risk their own safety to save others. They train for years, learning technical skills and mountain medicine, preparing for the call that might come at any time. The mountains inspire not just individual achievement, but also compassion and community. In some mountain caves there are formations called helictites, thin, delicate structures that grow in seemingly random directions, defying gravity. They form when water seeps through the rock so slowly that each drop deposits its minerals before surface tension causes it to move in unexpected directions. The result is twisted, spiral, branching forms that look more like plants than rocks. The mountain creates these abstract sculptures in darkness, patient and unseen. The snowline on mountains changes with the seasons, advancing and retreating like a tide. In summer it retreats upward, exposing rock and meadow. In winter it descends, covering more of the mountain in white. This boundary between snow and no snow divides the mountain into zones, each with its own character, its own community of life. There are mountain goats that have learned to lick salt deposits from cliff faces. They'll climb nearly vertical rock to reach these mineral licks, balancing on tiny ledges, driven by their body's need for salt. It's a reminder that even in mountains, where life seems sparse, there are resources if you know where to look and have the courage to reach them. Mountain meadows often have small streams meandering through them, creating music as the water burbles over rocks and around grass tussocks. These streams catch the light, glittering in the sun, adding motion and sound to the stillness of the meadow. Following one of these streams upward, you'll eventually find its source, a spring emerging from the ground, or snowmelt seeping from beneath a snowbank, the mountain offering water to the thirsty land below. The pressure of glaciers can be so immense that it melts the ice at the very bottom, even when the surface temperature is far below freezing. This meltwater acts as a lubricant, allowing the glacier to slide over the bedrock. The glacier moves on a film of water created by its own weight, flowing like a very slow river, carving the valley deeper with each passing century. In the mountains of Japan, snow monkeys bathe in hot springs during winter. These Japanese macaques are the northernmost living primates, other than humans. They've learned that the hot springs provide warmth during the coldest months. Watching them sit in the steaming water, snow on their heads, expression serene, you see the universality of the desire for warmth and comfort. Mountain passes often have shrines or cairns built by travellers. In the Himalayas, prayer flags flutter at high passes, carrying prayers on the wind. In the Andes, travellers add stones to apachetas, piles of rocks that grow with each passing pilgrim. These markers are evidence of human presence, small monuments saying, "I was here, I crossed this mountain, I survived." The colour of a mountain lake depends on many factors: minerals in the water, depth, the nature of the lake bed, the angle of the sun. Some lakes are turquoise, coloured by glacial flour, fine rock powder suspended in the water. Some are deep blue, clear and cold. Some are green with algae. Each lake is unique, holding its particular colour like a secret. There are mountain valleys that have their own languages, developed in isolation over centuries. In the Caucasus, some valleys have languages spoken by only a few thousand people. These languages are treasures, embodying unique ways of thinking about the world. The mountains preserve these linguistic islands, protecting them from homogenization. When glaciers calve, when a chunk of ice breaks off and falls into the water, the sound is tremendous. A crack like thunder, then the roar of falling ice, then the splash and the waves. But before the sound, there's often a moment of visible motion, the ice shifting, cracks appearing, the glacier giving birth to an iceberg. Its creation and destruction simultaneously, the cycle of ice made visible. Mountain soils are often thin, just a layer over bedrock. It takes thousands of years to create even a few inches of soil from bare rock. Lichens grow on the rock, slowly breaking it down. Plants take root in cracks, their roots further fragmenting the stone. Organic matter accumulates. Gradually, imperceptibly, rock becomes soil. The mountain slowly transforms itself into the substrate for life. And now, my friend, as we come to the end of our journey through these 100 mountain facts and more, I hope you found some peace in these ancient landscapes. The mountains will still be there tomorrow, patient and permanent, waiting if you want to visit them again. But for now, let yourself drift off. Imagine yourself on a quiet mountainside, the air cool and clean, the world vast and still around you. Rest well, knowing that somewhere, mountains are standing silent watch, as they have for millions of years, as they will for millions more. Sleep peacefully, and I'll see you again soon. Good night.